This is my version of Din Tai Fung's chocolate and Mochi Xiao Long Bao. This recipe has 3 components. We have the chewy dumpling skin on the outside, the thin delicate layer of mochi, and the melty chocolate ganache on the inside. I'm going to break down each component, but I do have a much more simplified version of these dumplings, which I will go over later in this video. Now let's begin by making our ganache filling so that we'll have time to set. The best chocolate to use in my opinion is Semisweet. Bittersweet is a little bit too dark for my liking, and milk chocolate is too sweet. But go with your personal preference and follow the recipe based on the type of chocolate you use. Try to use some high quality chocolate for these dumplings. You actually don't need much, so I recommend you splurge a little and go buy that fancy Swiss or Belgian chocolate. I'm chopping up my chocolate bar into small pieces so that it will melt more evenly. I only have 72% chocolate on hand, so I'm doing a mix of dark and milk chocolate. Add a pinch of salt to your chocolate and heat up your heavy cream to a gentle simmer. Then pour your hot cream over your chocolate and let it sit for a few minutes to allow the chocolate to melt before you stir. Give it a quick stir and add in your butter while it's still warm. If you find that your chocolate hasn't completely melted after stirring for a while, you can put it in the microwave for 10-second increments, stirring in between until everything has evenly melted and is smooth. Cover up your ganache and put it in the fridge to set for a couple hours. You can even make this in advance and leave it in the fridge overnight. If you're in a hurry, you can also put it in the freezer. Once the chocolate has set, we are going to scoop out 1 heaping teaspoon balls. I keep a cup of hot water to dip and clean my spoon in between each scoop. If you have an extra small ice cream scoop or melon baller, that would work great, but if not, you can also use a rounded measuring spoon. Once you are done, cover and put it back in the freezer. Next, we are going to start our dumpling dough. I'll be using a combination of glutinous rice flour and bread flour. You can either use this Japanese sweet rice flour or this glutinous rice flour, not to be confused with regular rice flour. Using the Mochiko flour will result in a stickier, softer dough. You may need to add a little more flour if you find the dough too wet to work with. Now in a bowl, combine your bread flour, glutinous rice flour, and salt. The reason I do a mix of the 2 flours is because the glutinous rice flour adds an extra chewiness and softness to the skin. Pour in your hot water while stirring constantly. It won't seem like very much water, so just mix it until you get a shaggy, dry dough. Then add in your room temperature water and the oil. Finish combining the dough with your hand. Once it has mostly come together, you can stop and cover it and let it rest for 10 minutes. After about 10 minutes, the dough will be much softer. Knead the dough for about 2 to 3 minutes until it's smooth. This shouldn't take long. Again, we'll cover it up and let it sit at room temperature for about an hour. In a microwave-safe bowl, add your glutinous rice flour, sugar, and cocoa powder and mix well. Then pour in your milk and mix until well combined. Cover the bowl with plastic wrap and poke some holes on the top. Microwave at 60% power for about 50 seconds. The dough is going to look a little off and a little chunky, and you may think you have messed up, but this is normal. Add the butter and mix until your butter is melted. Wrap it up again and put it back in the microwave at 60% power for another minute. Mix it again with a strong rubber spatula. Check the consistency of the dough. It should be stretchy, bouncy, and thick. If it's still a little wet, put it back in the microwave for another 15 seconds until you reach this consistency. Set it aside to cool for a couple minutes. Dust your counter with cornstarch. Knead the mochi for a few minutes with your hands, and don't be afraid to add more cornstarch to help prevent it from sticking. Divide your mochi into 12 equal pieces. Each piece will be about 8 grams. Cover up the mochi that you are not working on so they don't dry out. Then roll out one piece at a time. Try to get it fairly thin and dust off any excess cornstarch. Place the ganache in the center and very carefully seal it. Try not to get any ganache on your fingers or on the outside of the mochi, because it will create a big mess and the mochi won't seal properly if the ganache is coming out. Pinch off any excess dough if necessary, and continue until you have wrapped up all 12 balls of ganache. They don't have to look perfect since we'll be wrapping them again in the dumpling dough. Once finished, cover it up and put it back in the refrigerator. For your steamer basket, you will need to put liner on the bottom to prevent the dumplings from sticking to the basket. I cut out my own parchment paper and put some holes in it to allow the steam to rise to the top. You can also cut out individual squares for each dumpling. I ordered this basket on Amazon and it came with these liners, but I never have luck with them and the food sticks to the paper every single time. Divide your dumpling dough into 12 equal pieces. Again, this is about 8 grams each, and keep your dough covered when you're not working on it. Start by flattening your dough and then roll it out. You can dust your counter with bread flour to prevent it from sticking. I like to use this method of holding the dough in one hand and moving the rolling pin back and forth with the other, but do whatever works best for you. The key is to get the edges more thin than the center since we are pleating the edges together and the layers can make it pretty thick. You can see here just how thin I roll it out. If it's not thin enough, the dumplings will be too thick and chewy. Place your ball of chocolate right in the center and start pleating the edges. I find it's easier to leave the whole thing on the counter while I do this. This takes a lot of practice, but you are just creating small overlapping folds all the way around. Then you can twist and pinch off any excess dough at the top. You can make these in advance and freeze them, then just steam them straight from the freezer and add an extra minute or two. Okay, so I promised a simplified version of this recipe. This is a great option if you're limited on ingredients and time. Make the dumpling skin and skip the mochi layer and skip the homemade ganache. Just wrap the dough around a truffle and call it a day. The filling will be a bit more runny than the ganache, and I would recommend using a dark chocolate truffle. Since you're not making the mochi, you probably won't have glutinous rice flour on hand. If that's the case, you can just replace the glutinous rice flour with the bread flour. Using just bread flour will change the texture of your dumpling skin, but not enough to make a huge difference. And for half the amount of work, I would say they're pretty damn good. Once your dumplings are wrapped and ready, steam them for about 8 minutes. Meanwhile, we are going to make the sea salt cream. It's easy, just whip up some heavy cream, sugar, and salt. I find the milk frother works well for a small batch like this. You can also whip by hand or use a mixer. I mix to about soft to medium peaks. I start off with a 1/4 teaspoon of salt and 2 tablespoons of sugar, but you can adjust to your liking. Just look at these beauties. They're best enjoyed immediately while the chocolate is melty and the skin is still delicate and soft.